excited about the event today. We are doing this in conjunction with Deaf Women's History Month. And before I ask the panel to join us, I will explain just a little bit. You know, we know so many strong, committed women who have navigated the educational environment and employment settings. They've broken barriers, and they are a very powerful minority, these group of women. They are activists, inventors, advocates, and really run the range of careers because these women can literally do anything at the local, state, and national levels. So with that, we are celebrating Deaf Women's History Month, and we have 4 fantastic women joining us today. They make this environment a better place. They make this world a better place. With that, panelists, please join me on screen. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you again for joining us. It is a great time to spotlight deaf women, and I'm honored to have each of you here with us today. So thank you for that. Before we get into the questions, I would like to start with introductions and a brief, possibly 1 or 2 sentences, just briefly describing your background. So who would like to start?
I'll go first.
Okay, Kavita.
This is my sign name. I'm Kavita, and I'm actually here in California in the LA area. I'm an immigrant to the United States. I'm also the president of the California Association for the Deaf. And so I am a female immigrant.
Wonderful. Okay, Claire. Hi, my name is Claire, and this is my name sign. I am from Michigan, and I teach high school. I teach science and graduated from a school for the deaf. And I'm now ready to give back to a school for the deaf by teaching deaf children. All right, this is Laura. Thank you so much. Leah or Julia, who would like to go? Julia, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Williams Wallace. I live right outside of DC in Maryland. I did grow up in California, but San Diego area. I'm the manager for the National Children's Center here in DC. Wow, we have the West, Central, and East covered. So let's go ahead with Leah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah. My name sign is an L in a 7 shape. I work at Microsoft in communications for the Office of the CEO. I'm here in Seattle, Washington. Now, prior to moving to Seattle, I lived in Washington, DC, and I worked in politics for 10 years. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. Again, thank you for joining us. Before I get into the questions for all of you, I would like to hear the stories you have to share with us today. But before we do that, let's start with a poll to our audience. So you in the audience will see the first poll question come up here. And the question reads, do you feel like being a deaf woman has contributed to some of the barriers and challenges you have experienced? And the possible answers are yes, no, and sometimes. We do ask the audience to answer these questions to help panelists gauge who they're speaking to today and how we can provide some support from our personal stories. I'll allow a few seconds for everyone to respond. All right, and we see here the results of the poll. So you can see here that 71% agree with the statement that they do feel like being a deaf woman contributed to some of the barriers. 24% said sometimes. So that's an overwhelming percentage of people who have experienced barriers as a deaf woman. So that leads to our first question for the panelists today. How do you feel your gender has posed some barriers throughout your experience? And would you share some stories from those experiences?
I guess I'll go ahead.
Great. Go ahead, Kavita.
So I can say with a lot of certainty. I used to work for a very large corporation. I also worked for, one was a nonprofit and one was for profit. And then there was a third one that is third employment place, which was a university. You know, my identity first as a woman, as an immigrant, as a deaf individual. The triad of those identities are things I had to kind of overcome so people could see me and the talents that I actually have, not just the identity that they may see in front of them. I also had to, you know, kind of work with them to help them see me. When I was working in the corporation, you know, mostly that setting had men as managers and in that workplace setting, and most of them were white males in that setting. There were rarely any people that were from other countries or that were Black, Indigenous, or other peoples of color. So the oppression in that situation, particularly as a female and as a deaf person, was really significant. And in those three different settings, it was a little different, but still, it always came back to my identity. I was able to I had to work harder to show my skills and show the range of my experience, particularly during the interview process. And when I finally, you know, was doing my work and they could see my skills through my performance, it really made a hard argument for them against me to not validate the skills that I had. So I was able to represent myself through the work I did.
Well, I can imagine those conversations, those delicate conversations you had, and you wanted to share what was true for you and what you were experiencing without sabotaging your opportunity to have a job. Who else on the panel would like to share from their experience?
Oh,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I'll go ahead. This is Julia here. You know, from my experience, I could think specifically, you know, about working with families, you know, different cultures. You know, thinking up that as I grew up, I was heavily involved in sports. You know, because my parents had believed, you know, they always had a lot of attention on my brother, not so much on me. They would give my brother a lot of attention. He had a car and he got all these extra things. And I always wondered, you know, what about me? My opportunities and things were limited. And that caused me a lot of grief. However, when I went to high school, I actually went to a public high school. But it was around that time that I was able to go ahead and get in sports. Prior to that, I wasn't allowed to play in sports.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that experience. Okay, Claire, you had something to share? This is Claire. I wouldn't call it a huge barrier, but I did grow up in a hearing family. My parents were very supportive. They learned American Sign Language. My parents worked to ensure there were no barriers to me throughout my education. And I realized that I'm very fortunate that I went to a school for the deaf, that I attended Gallaudet. Now I work in a school for the deaf. So because of that, I have not experienced a lot of barriers, but I do credit my parents for that. Now, once I got out of high school, I had to push myself rather than my parents providing those knocking down those barriers for me. This is Laura. That family background, our culture, our experience and our upbringing are all so important and plays into the diversity of people. All deaf people don't have the same experience. So I appreciate the diversity of experiences you had. Leah, would you like to, or Kavita, go ahead and add.
Yes, I just want to add to what Julie was mentioning about family. Myself being from India, if you graduate from high school, the expectation was that you got married right away. There were no futures, your future wasn't laid out for you. My parents did ask me, what do you want to do in the future? I'm a very proud Indian individual. I wanted to stay in my home country, but my parents had thought about, there's no opportunities for education here for deaf individuals. Maybe you want to consider something else. And I actually didn't agree with them. They had offered me an opportunity to go to college and not just get married. And I was pretty much against that. And they actually told me that I was going to go to the United States. And I was not really looking forward to it because I didn't know anyone. They were going to send me off alone. I thought about that, and it was really a difficult decision for me, but I went ahead and took that opportunity. And because of that opportunity, I'm where I am today. So again, I am grateful to my parents to really setting me up in the position that I am today.
Yeah,
we do have some resources. This is Laura, that show how that parental involvement is so critical. So we'll share that. Leah?
Absolutely. As the other panelists have talked about their family support, I agree. Family is so important to me. And in my upbringing, first I want to give credibility to my parents. They are the reason I am where I am today. They never, they said to me, you can be anything you want to be. And they reminded me that I could do anything I want. However, they were also realistic, and they would say how I could get there. So that made me think about how I could get to where I wanted to be. And because of that, from my parents, it really sparked in me the thinking on how I could get to where I wanted to be. And I really want to give my parents credit for that. Now, in terms of my personal experience and barriers I have experienced as a deaf woman, I do think that I'm now entering what I'll consider the second half of my career. Prior to this moment, the first half of my career was in politics. And to be honest, the first half of that was also sort of pre-me time. And so I worked as a deaf woman in a hearing environment. I also worked in politics, and I worked in many places where really boundaries were very blurred. And I felt like I was always on guard against inappropriate situations. And I had to be very cautious and careful. Communication was a challenge as well. Anytime, if I gave someone my phone number to text, I found that often people misunderstood my intent and thought that they wanted to have a personal relationship with me. And I said, no, this is just about having communication access. I just want to be able to talk to you. And that meant that harmed my network. And that was a challenge, because I realized that, if I was a man, my network would look so vastly different because I wouldn't be judged on my womanhood. And so looking back, I wonder where I would have been if I was a man. But there is absolutely no regrets, no remorse of me wanting to have a different path. I believe my career gave me a rich experience, and it made me who I am today. And I really am appreciative for what I have been through, what I have seen. I really appreciate all of it.
Leah, would you mind expanding a little bit more about your networking approach? Because it's very challenging for so many people when they want to network, and the communication issues. What strategies did you come up with?
Yeah, other key areas that I just want to emphasize in my personal experience, which were also big challenges, was internships. In that world, that's where I started my career. And as an unpaid intern, that was very, very, very normal. It still is very normal today in politics, but there are many places that offer paid internships now. They do happen. That was not the case in my experience. And so to get an unpaid internship means really, in a lot of situations, you just don't have power. And you don't have that sense of security, because an internship is really an expendable experience for an institution where they really exploit, and they can exploit interns. And so my response to that was to work 3 times as hard than any of the other interns who were hearing. And I worked so hard in my time. I remember when I was an intern at the White House, and there were a group of 15 people who were interns. I was the only one who was invited back for a position to be an employee because I worked so hard. And another thing that I'll say too is about my previous experience. During my internship, I tried to network, I tried to talk to people, but I realized that I couldn't do it that way because I wasn't a full-time employee, so I didn't have an interpreter. The interpreters were for full-time employees. I was not offered that as an intern. And so I just had to deal with it. And because I really wanted to work in politics, I desperately wanted that opportunity. And it was so important to me. So I stuck with it and I accepted the terms, and I knew that I would not have access to information. So I had to do it the old-fashioned way with a pen and paper or text messaging. Thankfully, at that time, social media was on the rise, and it really helped me with my networking. And I made a lot of friends that way. And so I want to say the importance of making friends through social media and texting. You know, many of these people became good friends of mine even to this day, and they became my support network, other women, other interns. I will also say that my Latina heritage also has been really wonderful, because I have a lot of great friends who are also Latina, who are women, and maybe they're not deaf, but they want to support other brown women as well. And so we bond over that. And to this day, I have so many wonderful friendships, people that I love deeply because of that relationship we have supporting each other. So people in politics who are of color and women who support each other, that it is so important that we find each other and build networks. Because as an intern, I didn't have that accessibility. And I know that it was just so easy to be exploited as an intern. And I had to sort of keep my eye on the prize for what was coming ahead. And once I got beyond that internship experience and I got a paid position, it really lightened up after that and made things much easier, but it was very difficult in the beginning.
Oh, goodness. I know, as a mother of a deaf college student, she's in college now. In a similar way, you know, we have been pushing her to experiment in the outside, and it can be scary for a deaf woman to do that, to navigate different ways to approach communication. And social media, you're right, social media is such a powerful tool. Networking is key to how we get through our educational and employment experience. And then considering culture and other identities and how we are perceived is an important part. So thank you for sharing that, Leah. Let's get one last opportunity for this question before we move on to the next question. Anyone? All right, for the audience, we have a second poll question we'll send your way. And the question reads, when you were younger, did you get the resources and support you needed for your success? And the options are yes, no, and sometimes. We'll leave that question up for just a few seconds. And now we can see the results. So 32% of you answered yes. When you were younger, you did get resources and support you needed. 20% said no. And 48%, sorry, I might have to lean in to see the small font there. 48% said sometimes. So that is, that's a good indication. It's a good mixture of responses. Some of you have gotten resources, some didn't, and others it may have been sporadic when you got those resources. So with that, I will pose the second question to the panelist. When you were younger, how was it for you to get these resources that you needed, and how has that contributed to your success today? Claire? This is Claire. You know, looking back, I think about my high school experience, and I had wished that in my last year of high school, my last years, we would have been better prepared. It didn't even have to be a credit class, just something to prepare me for what was to come, to think about the major I wanted to choose. And I had an idea of the major, but realizing it was my responsibility to choose my courses I would take and to be taught specifically what it would take as a deaf person to advocate for myself after high school, and what it would take to go to college and work with the transition coordinator. You know, and whenever I was at a school for the deaf, we had a transition specialist who kind of did everything for us. So I would have appreciated more exposure from deaf people, maybe having deaf people come to our classroom and share their experiences, offering workshops that would really help us advocate these barriers that we experience after we graduate high school. So I would have liked to have seen that so that I could have worked harder during that transition phase of high school. I did have VR, but I had to work very hard to get scholarships because VR did not cover everything, and my VR counselor wasn't extremely helpful. So I had to work very hard to get scholarships to figure out how to get financial aid and other funding to pay for my school. So it would have been nice to have a little more support in that area. This is Laura. That takes a lot of skills, and we learn it as we go through trial and error and develop a real talent of navigating those barriers. And you're right, it would have been nice to have learned that in high school. And it would have relieved a lot of stress you experienced when you first went to college. Julia?
Yes, I attended and graduated from a public high school in San Diego. But 4 years prior to that, I attended the Kendall School. And that was the first school for the deaf that I had ever attended. But because I was in a military family, we moved around quite a bit. So during my 8th grade year, my parents let me know that we were moving to California. I was heartbroken because at Kendall, I had access to friends, communication and language, and I had access to my teachers. But we had to move to California. My parents placed me in a public high school where I really struggled. For the first 3 years of high school, I had no interpreters. I had to sit in the front of the room and try my best to read lips. It was really hard, and honestly, I lost motivation even to try my best. Interestingly, though, that high school did have a special program for deaf students, but it was determined it wasn't a fit for me. So the supervisor of that program sent me to mainstream classes. So the first 3 years of high school, I had no interpreter. I just had to read lips. And then finally, in my senior year, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, the school had to comply, and I was given an interpreter. But by that time, I had completely lost my motivation. I didn't understand why I couldn't have had an interpreter during the 7 years prior in my public education. I might have thrived academically and been more ready for college, but the lack of resources at that time had a great effect on me. After graduating from high school, I applied to Gallaudet University, but I didn't get accepted. I had a strong feeling that my parents had intervened in some way. That was another barrier. I knew I could have gotten into Gallaudet, but I had a feeling in some way my parents played a role in me not being accepted.
So instead, I went to a local college, a local community college. And again, they didn't have the resources there. There was no organization for deaf students. There were just nothing available for support while I was there. So I made it through there. And then eventually eventually, around 2003, I made it into Gallaudet, and I was completely overwhelmed with the amount of resources that were available. And I'm very fortunate and proud that I was able to graduate from there.
Wow.
Julia, do you have any other experiences growing up in high school with any types of services or being self-motivated?
Nope, I did everything myself. I just really took care of as much as I can on my own.
That requires a lot of bravery on your part. Kavita?
Again, as I mentioned, I am from another country, so I had absolutely no clue about resources. They don't have those type of opportunities in the country and where I'm from. You know, I did mostly spoke English growing up. I did not use any sign language. I had no idea about interpreters, in fact. I wasn't really quite sure even about American culture. I actually didn't even know about deaf culture. You know, I had my personal experience. I understood how to navigate personal life. I understood how to I apologize. I really relied on my family to help me do everything. I didn't even know how to navigate my personal things as taking care of my finances and those type of things. So when I did make it to America, it was overwhelming, and I was actually really lost. And this is because prior to that in India, the men usually took care of all these responsibilities. So when I got to the United States, I didn't even understand what it meant, you know, that I spoken English only. I didn't understand the dynamics of using sign language. I wish I had some other supports that helped me plan better for this experience, but it was something I had to be assertive and learn on my own. I had to ask questions. I had to, you know, rely on my friends and roommates. I'm really grateful to my roommate because they taught me a lot. They also were born in the United States and they primarily spoke in English, but I would always ask them questions to help me learn about the different situations. And, you know, my roommate would always say to me, I can't believe you came here and not know all these things. Like, how did you even make it? You know, people rejected me often because I didn't sign, you know, I didn't look like them. I felt very alone. So I really was grateful for my roommate who taught me these things that I really needed to know. They taught me different words. They taught me about banking systems. They taught me how to function independently. You know, so my roommate became my resource, in fact. They helped me navigate and discover my own personal journey to independence. So as I look back in my life in my home country, I would certainly recommend that parents set up opportunities for their children to learn. It could be some kind of, you know, parents need to look into researching, maybe going into presentations so they can understand the resources that their children need, but not to give them anything is not an option. I do remember one recruiter had come from Gallaudet to my college and they explained these things, but they didn't really give me a full clue about what I had to do to meet those expectations to graduate and actually go through the entire process. It really was a difficult process as I reflect on my experience. I just truly wish there was some type of resources that were provided to the parents as well as to universities and maybe even the counselors so they understand how to better support deaf individuals as they navigate this process.
As a transition coordinator, I had noticed many coordinators who are working on the things that you've mentioned, and hopefully it will just continue to get better. Leah?
You know, it's interesting. Well, I just want to say that I am really very, very fortunate that my mom is deaf. So I was raised with language. I consider myself so privileged to have had that. I fully acknowledge that, and that everyone should have access to language at birth, no matter what their situation is. Because My mom is deaf, and I was born deaf. My family did not expect that to happen. And because of the environment I was raised in, I had access to community, I had access to language, and I saw deaf role models growing up, but they were limited. I was told, though, and this was at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, when I was growing up and, sort of what are you going to do? My options were pretty limited. It was you could go into deaf education and you could certainly rise in the ranks in deaf education, or you could go into psychology. My mom is a social worker. And so I could certainly have pursued that path in psychology. I also could have worked in the post office. And those were the three career options that were presented to me. That's what I had in mind. And none of them really interested me. I wanted my own thing. I wanted to pursue my own interests. And so I got into theater, and I loved theater. Oftentimes people would say, ooh, theater is really tricky for a deaf person because if you don't speak, you're not going to make it. And I didn't have that trouble. I mean, I don't use my voice at all, but I felt like it wasn't really a practical choice of a career. And then when I got into college, I still wanted to pursue theater, but it just so happened that was the time of the protest for the deaf president now. And at that time, Senator Obama was running for president. He became president. And so I made a complete 180 and I went into politics. I had absolutely no deaf role models in politics. There are deaf lawyers. Claudia Gordon is an absolute role model that I admire. If you haven't met her, oh my gosh, I very much look up to her. But I certainly met many, many people who supported me. When I got into the White House, it was really kind of the same situation where she and I got into the White House at the same time and we supported each other. And I was just absolutely so grateful to Claudia Gordon. And I was very lucky that when I worked in the White House, I was not completely alone. I mean, I certainly did feel lonely because, working in politics as a deaf woman of color, I was not completely alone. Claudia Gordon is also a deaf woman of color who works in politics. She worked in the Obama White House, and she was my role model and my peer. So I feel very privileged and very fortunate to have had that very unique experience.
That's wonderful.
I'm very lucky for her, Claudia. God bless her, Claudia.
Yes, yes. Those role models mean so much to us. We do have a question here from the audience. This person says, Julia, I cannot even imagine what you went through. What made you think your parents had something to do with you not getting into Gallaudet in the beginning? And then they state, what is it that you think? They said that you're a phenomenal woman with no interpreter all those years. So why did you feel that your parents could have contributed to you being accepted?
Honestly, I wish I knew. I just don't have a clue. I really, again, maybe they were, overprotective. That's something I can kind of come up with at this time.
Well, I agree with what this person said here. You're a phenomenal person to have gotten through what you did with no services. So
Thank you so much.
We have another question here for the audience. So let's post the third and final poll question for our participants today. So for the audience, did you feel prepared for life after high school? And the possible answers are yes, no, or sometimes. And here are the results. 15% said yes, they felt prepared, while 48% said no, they were not prepared or did not feel prepared. And then 37% said sometimes. So thank you for that. So panelists, did you feel prepared when you reached the end of your high school career? Whether that meant you were going straight to college, a vocational or technical training school. Did you feel prepared?
Absolutely not. I'm in the middle there. Absolutely not. In the 3 poll questions, the answers, responses to those poll questions, I'm in the middle there. Absolutely not. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, I had no support, no preparation for life after high school. However, I would share with everyone who's out there, even though I may have not been prepared, there are people that come into your life. For example, my best friend. And, it may throw you off and you may not know what you're doing, but you leverage those relationships to help build yourself. And that's something you pass on to other people in the future. So I do encourage you to take what you have learned to support others. There may be other people out there that are coming in the same situation as I may have, not having that foundation, but then you can provide them with the support. They may never have had a mainstream experience. They may not have socialized with other deaf people. It's really important that you just welcome people and you support them no matter where they're going, just like my roommate did for me for so many years. And so I can't recommend that enough for anyone who's out there. So that's my advice. Be inclusive. It doesn't matter if it's a parent, if it's a deaf individual, just stand behind them and support them as much as you can.
What fantastic advice, Claire. Yeah, this is Claire. I totally agree. I had a high school teacher who really advised students heavily in their final years of high school and would often mention about SSI, about job opportunities, about how to schedule classes, to warn us that books were very expensive. My biology books, could have been in the hundreds of dollars. So that renting would be a better option, that you can do an ebook rental or find free books. So we were given advice by one of the high school teachers. And that teacher also helped with us writing resumes and things such as that. We have options. If we don't want to go to a traditional college, there are trade schools, beauty schools, and other options. But the point was that teacher encouraged us to really push ourselves. So there were specific teachers who gave us a lot of advice and counsel. Yeah, this is Laura. Those high expectations from adults are so important. We have to keep in mind that deaf kids can do more than what we may think they can. Leah, Julia, anything you'd like to add? Julia?
I believe starting to prepare for life after high school actually starts in the 8th grade. It gives you something to look forward to, what your life could be like after high school. So then when you actually leave high school, you can start on your pathway. You can start on your whole journey to the place where you're going. It could be college, it could be somewhere else. But for me, it wasn't until I got to Gallaudet that really just changed my life completely and changed my whole perspective on my future.
It's exciting to be on a new journey, and it can be a little nerve-wracking and induce some anxiousness, but that level of independence is so important.
Yes. The independence, being an independent, strong woman is really important.
Yeah, and this is Claire's self-identity, developing a self-identity too. Leah?
Yeah, really, I think it's very, very natural and unavoidable that what we see growing up, we absorb and we accept that as reality. And so, as I mentioned, I grew up not seeing many different options as a deaf person for careers. And so having limited fields available to me as a deaf person and not being able to see those roles, I think that's really where the danger is, because that is where, the system of white supremacy is at play, because it's sending a message to Black and brown people, immigrants, that you don't belong in these fields. They're off limits to you. That's extremely dangerous. And people internalize that as a truth. And to be honest, adults, especially adults who work in the school system, have a responsibility to tell kids that there is more out there, that you can do more. I'll also add to that my parents had a huge impact on me, and, they may have not said I could do absolutely everything, and they wanted to see me sort of stumble and learn how to get there. And they guided me on how to get there strategically. And if there is a door that is closed to you, it is not actually closed. You are free to be where you want to be. You do not have to limit yourself. And I think that we as deaf adults who are part of this system have a responsibility to remind the next generation that you can always be more than what the current system shows you.
And that last quote is so good. Thank you for sharing that. I completely agree. We have to remember and fight for our place. And it can be a challenge to get to a place of equality, for sure. Kavita, did you want to add something?
I just want to second Leah. I absolutely second everything she says. It's definitely true.
Very good. From your comments, it's a mixture of mentoring being so important in helping us navigate our futures, to be able to be aware of our rights and navigate barriers that come up, and then make a name for ourselves to fight through those with support, but also working on our own to see success. Well, I'm so excited to hear more from you panelists, but let's look at a question here from the audience. It says here, as of now, more and more deaf students are fully mainstreamed and know nothing about college or universities for the deaf. How would you approach resolving that issue?
Would you repeat the question again, please?
Sure. More and more deaf students now are fully mainstreamed and are not aware of colleges or universities or programs with deaf services. So what kinds of conversations would you encourage others to have to help find the options that are out there and available to deaf students? Julia?
Oh, that was a question from Susan? Okay, I'm personally a member of the DC Area Deaf Advocacy Organization. We've realized the importance of going to public schools and to give presentations about resources. It is important for nonprofit deaf organizations to use the opportunity to expose deaf children in the mainstream setting to deaf role models. And I hope that this would solve the problem of the lack of access to resources in the future.
Kavita?
I think I would focus on, I particularly will focus on the international students or students who are coming here from other countries. They often come here believing that, the United States has these outstanding universities, and Gallaudet or CSUN may be the only options for them. There are other options, but maybe Gallaudet is the only option for them. But that's actually not true. There's so many other options available. And they may not recognize that they have different programs and services within those universities to support deaf and hard of hearing students. Secondly, some countries do have deaf and hard of hearing students within their universities. It's not just the United States. So I do want to encourage those international deaf people to do their research. Ask your friends. And I'm mentioning this because, not that I'm saying I don't want you to come to the United States. I fully support that idea. But, coming here is quite expensive and it may not be affordable. The tuition here is 3 times, 4 times where it may be in their home country. So, I understand that, I tell them what they think they actually have here may not be much different what they can get at home. So they really have to do their own research, and may not actually be better here than what they have at their home country. In their home country, they know their background, they know how their families are raised, so it's something that they can do in their home country if they so choose. If they do come here to the United States, just like Julia had mentioned, they need to be exposed to all these different opportunities. They need to be introduced to people. They need to be introduced to role models. They need to be able to ask the questions that they need to help them get the resources to navigate that journey. Again, researching things on your own is the best option that you could take advantage of.
It's true, and especially considering technology today. Even if you don't have that technology available at home, maybe the school has technology available for students to utilize. So you're right. It does depend on family. It depends on financial concerns, and it is costly in some places here in the United States. And then we look at support services that are considered a need. What accommodations, students need to ask what accommodations are provided at this school, and be aware of the list of possible accommodations that they could use. What about you? What did you do when you were preparing for college?
I decided to go to Gallaudet University because I wanted the cultural experience. That was my primary motivation for going to Gallaudet for my bachelor's degree. After that, I went to a public university for my master's degree, and I decided that was a good choice for me. I do have to step back and just say that what really helped me get through my experience was my willingness to accept uncomfortable situations. I was willing to go where it wasn't going to be easy for me, where it was going to be challenging and hard, and that's okay. And I stuck with it. And I was willing to put up with that. Others may not have had that same tolerance as I did. So I did a lot of reading. I read a lot of books. And the topic of grit I saw again and again, and the importance of sticking with things, having grit, was a big factor, I would say, in my success. And so to all of you who are watching today, to all of our panelists, I see the grit that you have, and I see that you have stuck with it, even though things were not easy for you. And I think that kind of quality is really what we should be promoting more, because sure, we're telling stories of success and showing people and celebrating their moments, but how did we get there? It is a trait that we have. We are not born with it necessarily. It's something that you can develop. And personally, my journey in identifying and building my own grit was accepting that things were what they are, and I needed to get through it and grow through it.
Wonderful advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, Leah. Okay, it looks like we are running out of time. Does anyone else have a final comment? You have shared so many fantastic things today. I wish that I had had this before my daughter went to college. I would have loved for her to have been able to see something like this before she began her journey. But I want to thank each and every one of you today for sharing your stories and your experience. They are powerful, and it really shows the barriers and frustrations that we went through in order to get where we are. And thank you again for offering this opportunity to those who are watching today and those who will.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
This is Claire. Thank you for inviting us. We do have a comment here from a participant who has said, I truly want to thank all of you for sharing your stories and experiences. It has been very inspirational, and I'm so glad I was able to join the event today. So thank you again to all of you. Thank you to the people participating for joining us. Look for a follow-up email we will be sending with more details and links to things discussed today. If you have any additional questions, you can email help@nationaldeafcenter.org. And we can forward your question to a specific panelist, or we can help answer your question. Also, we have a website with such a host of resources, the importance of high expectations, of parental involvement, of leveraging community resources, connecting with organizations like NBDA and other community advocacy resources. And so many of that can be found on our website, nationaldeafcenter.org. So be sure you check out our website. Today, we were focusing on deaf women. We have some statistics from a report we did studying education and employment and the gaps between deaf men and deaf women in the workforce and in education. So take a look at that report on our website as well. It has some very interesting statistics. Again, thank you. I hope you've all enjoyed the event, and thank you so much for joining us. Have a great evening, everyone.